Welcome to Better Leaders, the podcast, where we surface good leadership and smart management in media and beyond. Today, I'm talking to Trei Brundett, founder and until recently COO of Vox Media. My name is Anita Zilina, and I'm your host. Welcome to Better Leaders. So welcome, Trei. Fantastic to have you here today.
Thank you. I'm so excited to be here.
So Trei, part of the reason why I was so excited to have you as the first guest in the Better Leaders podcast is that you have such an interesting and fascinating career. And as the last big role in that career, you basically grew Vox Media from a tiny thing you started in the basement, some sports streams basically, to a big global media company and media organization. So I thought a good way to start is to ask you, what did you learn about yourself and you as a leader on that journey?
Yeah, well, thanks for having me. It's so exciting to be a part of the first one here and to be on this. So I think that I never could have imagined what Vox Media became. It's incredible. It's still, I get kind of like emotional thinking about how many amazing people I worked with and, just the experience overall, how proud I was of, what a great company it's become. Not only, the people there who really make it amazing, but, we created some really great media brands. And, I think as a leader, I grew so much. And I'm very privileged and lucky that I had that opportunity. It was the first startup where, my job wasn't to help write code and, hands-on build a product that way. And so, from the very beginning, it was the first time I was entirely focused on thinking about the product and thinking about, how to organize our teams and our company around, building that product and meeting our audiences. And I think that, through that, as you're building a company, you have to do a lot of different things. And so I was really lucky to have the opportunity to learn things that I had never, had the opportunity before to experience new things. And I got to grow. And I think, what made that special is that the people who I worked with really helped me learn how to be a good leader. And I think that's my number one lesson is that, you learn so much from the people who you work with, who work, for you, and the people you work for. But I think that, in that case, it was really the people who were, joined our team.
Yeah. I think it's an interesting point that you raise, because I often think about the question, how much did I learn about leadership from good bosses versus not so great bosses, versus how much did I actually learn from my teams. And I definitely, looking back, at various leadership roles I had, I can definitely say that the amount of learning that comes from working with a team and some people who work in your team and also dare to give honest feedback is probably, maybe more important or as important as learning from other leaders, right?
I think it's more important, honestly. I mean, I had some really amazing mentors and, folks who I worked for over the years, and that I learned from. But I can say that the moments when I was lucky to have people on my team who felt like they could give me honest feedback and good feedback, those are the moments where I really grew as a leader and where, they helped push me in a way that I became a lot better for them and for everybody around them. And so I think there's modeling that you get from good leaders, and but it's a little bit different when you do a startup. You are it's when you're in an early member of the team, you're all kind of helping each other as teammates. You don't have the same exact dynamic of this is your boss, and they are doing regular annual reviews or whatever with you. You're all kind of working together to build this thing. And so in that setting, I think it's even more important that you have really strong leaders that you bring into the company to work alongside you or for you that can do that.
So when did Vox Media reach the point, or when did you reach the point as a leader at Vox Media where you felt like, okay, this is not just a scrappy basement startup thing anymore. We need some people processes. We need to think about how we give feedback. We need to reflect on how we kind of acquire talent, KPIs, metrics, like all these things. Can you remember when that point came?
Yeah, I think, well, first of all, my basement was my kids' playroom that we appropriated. So, they were always, slightly aggrieved about being kicked out. We had the whiteboard on the, with the roadmap on a kid's easel, and, it was a lot of fun. But, and those days are just great. As you're building that and, kind of figuring out, do you have something or not? Have you figured this out yet? I think the stage of when you realize, okay, we've got to get, a little bit better organized, and, we've got to start putting, a little bit more process in place. We've got to make sure we've got a lot of things going on. We've got a lot of people. I think that stage was around, 2011, 2012, when, we became Vox Media. We had been SB Nation up to that point, and now we had the Verge, and we had launched the Verge, we'd launched Polygon, and, there were a lot more moving parts. And I think that, in order to make sure that we were able to do our best work, we really had to start putting some different pieces in place. We went very slowly about it, though. We were pretty allergic, I would say, to kind of, structure at that stage. And so I think, we went about it in kind of a learning and growing organic way rather than sort of overnight.
And did that, when you think back about that time, it's an incredible journey of scale and growth of the organization. Was that a conscious choice? Also for you, for the organization, but also for you personally. Did you envision, did you sit down and say, I want to lead a global media organization as COO or co-lead it? Was that kind of at some point a conscious decision of, I want to step up to do that? Or did it basically happen over a few years?
Yeah, I would say, I don't think we had that sort of big, grand ambition, out of the gate. I think we were really motivated by this idea that we were getting to, with the internet, just opened up all of these awesome possibilities. And, relatively early still in that, game back then. And we were empowering these, communities of people, really passionate people. That was really motivating for us, being very audience centric, user centric, getting to build things for them and with them, working with bloggers. It was, I think that's really what we just wanted to do that forever. Honestly, that's what it felt like, that it wasn't, how is this going to turn into a big global media organization? And so I think, we really, as we grew, sort of figured out what we needed to do to continue to be able to do that. And, if we could do it for more folks, because we, got into new areas, like technology and gaming and food and all that. That just meant that we got to do more of what we were already enjoying. For me personally, it was, really what needs to be done, what job needs to be picked up, what needs to happen here. And so, I think it was always a process where, for me, I was trying to, work with my teams and figure out, what else do we need? How do we need to get better? And as far as, ultimately becoming a COO, that's, the story there is that, I was, saying earlier, we kind of sat down with, my partner and building Vox, Jim Bankoff, and, said, hey, we're going to use the next time I'm in DC to, do kind of an annual review. And I made a list of all the things I'd done in my job title at the time, which was Chief Product Officer, and all the things that weren't. And I said, we should get somebody to do this other stuff. I think this is like a COO maybe. And he said, why don't you do it? And so that's how, that's how that happened, and ended up, kind of getting back to what was really the mode in the early days, which was, helping to grow and scale, the organization and the way that we operate. What are the projects that need to be done to make that happen?
It's actually quite visionary if you think about it today, because these days, all these media organizations are finally starting to understand the importance of COO roles, of CPO roles. And I mean, frankly, 15 years ago, there weren't that many, right? Or 10 years ago. It was like a kind of a new thing.
Yeah.
And if something like a COO role existed, it was usually someone in like finance as like a general manager or something. So it's interesting to see, like in hindsight, that what you built and the way you built it is actually quite visionary.
Yeah, well, I think where it started is, I think all, sort of great ideas come out of, necessity. But it's also, where our backgrounds were, right? And so, we came into, building this with, I think a little bit more of this sort of technology and product mindset, doing, product design and development. And so it was a real exciting opportunity to take those ideas and take what we had done, and oftentimes doing it for others previous to this role. And, bringing that to life in media. And so it was a practice that didn't exist really in our industry at the time. And so, but it served us really well as, we had the benefit of being, digital first and native. Like, that's just who we were. We didn't even use the words digital in that way. We were making internet. So you had to have that sort of, the unique sort of combination of product skills of bringing all these different pieces together to build, a digital product. And I think a lot of those same kind of organizational and, process and goal setting and, all of these really lend themselves to a lot of the same sort of needs that exist today in organizations that COOs are taking on, that are broader than just sort of the, kind of corporate, central capacity.
Absolutely. So as you think about these early days, whether, those were deliberate decisions on how to shape the culture, or whether they just basically happened organically because it's things you cared about, how would you describe as a leader having built that culture? Are there some adjectives, some words, some thoughts that come to mind as you think about that culture that you built in the organization, some things that were important for you?
Yeah, I think, collaborative is always the first one. We really thrived on collaboration. And I think that cross-functional collaboration is, just something that we had lived and breathed. We had, brought it into the organization, something that we had done really great work, whether it was collaborating with, architects or, collaborating with, editorial folks. This was, in our previous work. And I should say here that, I got started early with, my partners, Michael Lovett and Pablo Mercado, who came in and were helping to build this. And we had worked together for a long time. And that was our mentality. We found designers that we worked with that shared that mentality. And I think that we together really prized how productive and energizing it is to work closely together, for there not to be sort of, this side or that side. And we were eager to work really closely with, the bloggers and learn from them and listen, and with these audiences. And I think that collaboration really set the tone for the culture. It meant that no matter where you were in the company, there was a way for you to be a part of something. I really prized collaborating with our legal teams, or, our finance teams, these folks you bring in early in the process, you make better things. And so I think that when that is sort of a foundation of the culture, I think that it means that you're also going to be listening. You're going to be open-minded. You're going to be very, the product culture sort of is audience centric. So you're always thinking about, who are we making this for? And I would say, early on, that's what we were really focused on. I would say as we evolved and as folks came into the organization, I think that we learned that there were things that we needed to make a better team with, that, were, about being sort of ambitious about what the quality of the work was, and how innovative it could be from a design or technology perspective, making our team more inclusive, and having a more diverse team. And those are all things that I think really became part of the culture, where we were, it was about working together to build something. And there's nothing better than that feeling when you really have that team. I'm the most proud, honestly, of the team that we built at Vox Media. It's easily one of the biggest, successes of my career.
It's funny how over time in a career, you realize that it's all about the people you meet and whose careers you foster and who you touch, and not that much about the products, right? I mean, not saying that Vox Media's products aren't great and impressive, but it becomes more and more about humans, right?
Yeah. And when you think back on the story of those products, if you were in it and building it, the story is, the people who made it. Who you made it with, who you made it for, how they were all part of the story together. Mm-hmm. I think that is such a critical piece of it. And, there's not a single product that we launched that I can't think of, like, who was on the team, what they were doing, what their ideas were, the arguments that we had, the hard parts, the good parts, and that those people, really cared about it. And that was, I think, one of the things that's special is that when you're doing that together, that you really believe in what you're building together, and you have that, kind of shared idea. It's hard to break that loose.
Yeah. You mentioned the hard parts about that emotional attachment and that passion, right? I can imagine that it wasn't always, specifically because you were so involved and the culture was so collaborative and so feedback heavy. I can imagine it personally wasn't always easy to kind of get that feedback and to maybe take a step back and say, okay, we're going the different route. How do you personally, was that always easy for you? Did you learn it over time? How do you deal with feedback?
Yeah. I think, I definitely got better over time. I think, the way I came up in my career was, as sort of the young internet person in the room, hotshot that, knows how to do internet stuff, was, a programmer. And I think that the early feedback loops were, that it was exciting to be there. People were listening to me. And as I grew up and, realized like, hey, to make really awesome things and to sustain that effort, you have to build great teams, build strong relationships, and you have to listen, and you have to, learn from what you hear, really listen and grow. And that took some time. And I think, I'm always getting better at it. I think I was really lucky, honestly, that I had some great folks on my team who were able to provide really good feedback, clear feedback, and taught me how to provide, better feedback as well, so that I could take it in. And I think, learned a lot about, how to better understand where people were coming from and, what their perspectives were, and what was, even if it wasn't, the same place that I was coming from, that, it was valuable. I think collaboration teaches you that, especially if you kind of get outside of your bubble of who you collaborate with. That's, I think, really important. So I think, those were sometimes, difficult, but really only in the moment when you're processing it, or when you're hearing it for the first time. I think when you go and process it and you realize how incredible it is that people will provide that to you, I think it's actually really a wonderful moment where you're like, wow, I'm surrounded by, people who are, reliable narrators of what's going on here, and, willing to speak truth, about these things, whether it's about the product, about the culture, about, how well I'm doing. That's why I really think I learned the most from those folks, to be a good leader.
I mean, it's kind of an amazing proof of, an amount of psychological safety if folks feel that they can give you that open and honest feedback in a, transparent, friendly, but still direct way. And I feel like if I think back of media organizations I worked in or worked with, the unhealthiest places were the ones where people didn't feel they could give that transparent feedback. Yeah,
I think that's definitely, I think that's the whole thing. I think if you want to have a really productive team who is high performing, then I think that you need a really safe, place for folks to be able to know that they can communicate, really clearly, whether that's to their peers or to their, managers or to whoever, that they know that there's somewhere that they can go that, not only that they'll be heard, but, that something, will be processed. May not be exactly always what they're looking for, asking for, but that they are part of that process. They are part of, the way we're building the team, the way we're building the products. And, I think that, I think like a code of conduct is like a really great baseline to be able to do that. Like that's a good starting point. And, we were lucky we had some folks on our product team who used one of our hack weeks to write the first one of those. And they, sort of built it on others that they had seen. And that became our code of conduct for the it was input into the one that became for the whole company. We started with our team, and then we shared it and worked on it with the whole company. But I think you have to share that. You have to live it. You have to, everybody has to like learn it. You have to like really act it. And so, but I agree with you. Like, I think it starts with leadership, making sure that the space exists for, there's a culture where people feel like they can, provide that type of feedback, or, with each other, with their managers, leaders, whoever.
And I think it's fair to say that as an industry, the media and let's say content industry, broadly speaking, obviously we know that this is best practice, right? Yeah. But I still feel as an industry, we aren't there yet, right? I still feel that behind the scenes in those conversations we don't publicly have on podcasts or panels, there is still a lot of toxic behavior in news organizations. There is still a lot of conversation to be had about organizations that lack that psychological safety, that maybe have those guidelines, but don't live and enforce those guidelines.
Yeah. I think it's about people. You have to have the people who are, bought in on that. And it doesn't mean that people, I think, everybody is learning, always learning, and hopefully always trying to get better. And so I think everybody's at different places. And I think that, that's something that if we, sort of give people space to be able to learn and grow that way, that it can head to a better place. I agree that it's not always perfect, even within Vox Media. We certainly, weren't ever, we worked towards these goals, but, we all had to work harder to try to achieve these things. And I think that, some of this is, evolving, expectations. Some of it is, people were trained in different ways or had, kind of different examples that were set. And I think that, that's one of the things that, I think is still evolving. And, that I think if everybody, though, commits to like, hey, we're trying to, get to a good place. I will say that, I think we over index on talking about the generational thing. I think it is a thing, right? Like no question, like we're shaped by our environments, like what we came up in and all of that. But I will say that sometimes I feel like I'm very much against any sort of situation where we get into us versus them situation, right? It's too easy, to sort of write off, or, not treat with like equal levels of, kind of empathy or respect or compassion about, different folks. And so I think whether that's like different like the sort of sideism, like, there's the editorial side and the product side, like even those things,
totally.
Any of this.
so much sideism.
So much sideism. So I think if you're breaking that stuff down, and I think even generationally that's the case, I think there's more in common than there is different. I think it just requires, more empathy to sort of think about, hey, I've been in these similar situations. I learned different, I need to take the lessons from those things. As a leader, maybe you were trained up in a different time where there was different norms or whatever, but you felt a certain way. You should take those lessons and just apply them in a new context. I think it's just hard because those things were attached to success for you and your career or the way the company operated or whatever. But I think we can evolve those things. We have to. We do in business all the time. I don't. It's these are things that, especially in digital. I always used to joke like we don't make rail cars. It's not the same product. For the last 100 years or whatever. It's our products change almost every year. We're in this totally different world every year. So why wouldn't the way we work change as well?
I mean, this is all, I 100% agree with you, Trei, but I think I'd have if you would go into many legacy organizations, you would get managers who push back on that and say, listen, we can't do that whole reinvention thing like every year. Folks are tired, newsrooms are getting smaller, life is getting rougher, business is not going well. So now that we have to reinvent ourselves every effing year, I mean, that's quite exhausting. What do you tell these folks?
Yeah, I think, change is obviously change management is hard. I don't think you have to change every year, but I think that, I think that we have to be, in the same way that when we think about our business and our product and the way that we serve our customers, that we're listening. And we're adapting. We don't do that just to do it, right? We do that because we are making it better. We want to be successful. We want to grow and succeed. And so I think the same sort of organic, kind of model applies And it's different for different organizations. It's not the same, different organizations are different stages in their growth. They have, different people that, they need to be successful. And so I think a good leader knows how to kind of pace that. In the same way, hopefully, that they're good at, listening to the market or, listening to customers, the shareholders, whatever it is, listening to their teams and saying, hey, what do we need in order to be able to, accomplish this? Let's roll this out in a thoughtful way that we're, capable of doing and invest in it.
Yeah. And without stepping into the trap of over-indexing the whole generational thing, but let's over-index it a little, okay. Right? Let's talk about it briefly. There seems to be, whether it's purely generational or a mix of generational and culture and background and, perspective, there seems to be a difference in how organizations were led and managed and how the work life was organized.
Yeah.
From how mostly a younger generation wants their work-life balance to be, wants their work routines to be. There seems to be a general push for freedom and impact and the willingness to kind of create in a more self-destined way rather than having this very hierarchical 9-to-5 structure. So I do feel that there is a cultural conflict going on to a certain extent.
Yeah, I think I mean, no question, everybody's coming at it from a different perspective of, what they want, what they need, what they found to be, successful in getting them to that place, and so I think that those things the expectations are different. I think what's important though is that, it's too easy, I think, to stay, focused on that challenge instead of saying, okay, well, what's next? And what's next in my mind is always that what we need to do is be able to sort of bridge that by creating shared expectations. Let's agree on that and finding what we have in common in terms of what we value. We have the same mission. Let's talk through, the ways in which we want to be able to do that. And I think, this is, we focus on everything that is so different, but I think, and maybe this is, a generational thing to a certain extent. I'm part of Generation X, right? We're sort of like the sandwich between, two generations that seem to get most of the airtime that they are, at war. I don't know why that, I feel like we're kind of getting off easy, honestly. Somehow we're not, to blame for this. But I think a lot of it is that, we straddle, two worlds. One that, I think a generation that was, we lived a life without internet and then we lived a life with it. There was, I think, kind of a different, work set of work norms, very, very different ones that we were sort of came up in, but we, are, I think, understand and empathetic. So maybe that's the one thing I'll sort of buy into from a generational perspective, but that is that there's this sort of moment of change that we're in the middle of. But I think if from a leadership perspective, if you're listening and you're taking input like you should be about, how to build the culture and the ways of working, the things that are the same are that we all do things better together. You got to give people time to go off. I was a programmer. I used to go off in the, corner for, a couple of days and solve a hard problem and bring it back like a prize, but I think working together, having a shared mission is the same, and just how we go about doing that. I think if we can align expectations about that and, get on the same page about that, I think that's the future, is being more collaborative.
Totally. One thing where I do see, and again, it's not purely generational, but where I do see one field of conflict that's kind of getting getting busier and maybe, the the temperatures, the heat is going up a little bit, is that whole back to office, hybrid, remote thing. It seems to me, and that's just my impression, that some of the more legacy media companies are starting to push back more and more against that new hybrid world. If you look at the Washington Post, the New York Times, setting pretty strict rules for folks to be back in office. Now, folks who moved across the country, who now maybe live somewhere where there is no Washington Post or New York Times office, right? So it seems to me we are entering a world, this conflict is not going to go away, right? And I talk to people who work at these institutions who tell me, I'm not doing it. I'm simply not doing it. I learned how awesome it is to bring my kids to bed, to take a lunchtime walk, to see my partner more than like 1 hour a day. I'm not going back to being in the office full-time 4 days or 5 days a week. How do you think, do you see that to that extent, that conflict? Do you think that's going to go away? Is it going to quiet down?
Yeah, I think it's going to continue to play out. I think this is a case where, people are bringing different experiences to the table. I think that you have folks who are, have lived in a purely digital world, have succeeded in that in school, maybe, already for years in work, are more open to it. There's more people who are more open to it than before, right? And I think you have some folks who are still in leadership positions who, maybe didn't have that experience. Their success is tied to, like being in the office. I think there's another factor here, which is that it takes work to do remote well. And it's a new set of skills, and it is, a certain level of effort. It's a different, model. And I think, some folks, the trade-off there, makes a lot of sense for them. And there's some people who I think, still enjoy, going into the office because they find certain aspects of it easier, to do their job. But because everybody, because you have to account for the fact that anybody could be remote in these circumstances, then that means really everybody has to work in that way. And that does take, extra effort on behalf of everybody, to accommodate kind of the different working styles. So, at Vox, we put together, a hybrid work plan that, where we first did surveys and research and interviews with everybody. And, we found out that a third of folks wanted to be fully remote. A third of folks wanted to be kind of part-time in the office. And, a third of folks wanted to be in the office full-time. And we gave them kind of clear choices about how all of those things would work. And, I don't think that's been fully put into action since I left. I left in April of last year. And things are still, kind of evolving about, how we use the office. So, I think as we have kind of a new set of norms, I think, we're going to need to accommodate, those different preferences in different ways. I'm personally love, being in the office, not in a office by myself, which I was for a while and was sort of miserable. I realized I loved being out in the open and, being able to, see folks that I wouldn't normally see and have those conversations. But I think that's very informed by, what my experience had been in terms of, how I'd done some of my best work.
Yeah. Yeah. And I also love that you brought up that element of thinking about equity and inclusivity when it comes to those hybrid situations, because if you build an in-person first culture, and then you end up just having a few folks who are not in person and who have to rely on the terrible Zoom stream and like some weird camera angle. And if they want to speak up, they have to, write something in the chat. Obviously that is that is not a very inclusive culture.
No, it's not. And I think that, that's what is changing, is that I think that we're, being more aware of, the different circumstances, that folks are more comfortable in, more productive in. And, we have to take those things into account. And we also have to take into account, that we're still working as a team. That's the thing that hasn't changed, and I think that's really important for us not to lose sight of. I think, it's about, I think the conflict sometimes is about control, maybe gets framed that way. But I think, what gets lost in the noise is that there's folks who really prize collaboration and don't want that to be lost in, in the mix.
Which is a fair point.
Yeah.
You have to build for that consciously if you want it to happen in the digital or hybrid space, right?
Yeah. And I think some of these leaders who have been successful, look, like the best, the best solution to, any challenge in a company is to be successful, is to meet or exceed your goals, is to build a winning team and to be high performing together. Certainly when things are hard and you have a disappointing year, there's some satisfaction in like how we work through it together, but succeeding is important. And so I think a lot of leaders, when they're thinking about policies around this stuff and they're thinking through, how do we do this? They're thinking in the back of their mind, like, how do I help this company succeed and be successful? And what are the patterns that I've seen for that? Like, let's make sure we don't, just do away with those things. How might we, hold on to some things, because that's what we need to do. That's their job, is to make sure that the company succeeds, and, can't lose sight of that.
Yeah. One thing you mentioned as we started this conversation out on, things you learned along the way and started to prioritize more along the way. One thing you mentioned was diversity and equity as something that, Vox Media over time learned to build, stronger policies and focus more. Can you share a little bit about that?
Yeah.
How did that become more important over time? Were there mistakes that you made or, courses that you needed to correct over time to prioritize equity?
Yeah. We started as a sports media company. It's not exactly, I think, especially at the time, considered the most sort of like, inclusive, like world, sports media world, and I think that, there's kind of this like sort of sports culture, I don't know, that is not as like open to everybody that we wanted to attract, great engineers and designers. But we started in a way where we were like in a, this cool old, townhouse in DC that, was like a house, almost kind of had a sort of frat house type feel to it at times. Think too much. And, there were too many guys there. And, I think that what we learned is that if we really wanted to be, have a really big audience and serve, a lot of people, like that, we needed to evolve that. We needed to get better as a team. We were going to have better people as a part of it. So I think this, the mistake made is that we didn't, start that way. We, and I wish I had known more. I'd been, more dialed into that. So we had to evolve, out of that. And luckily we had folks who were part of our team, who we brought into the team over time, who were willing to say, hey, we can do better. And, I think, helped us to, think about why would we do this? And I think that it's more than just, it's better for business or better to build a bigger audience or whatever. It's that we have a responsibility and a commitment. And this is, I guess, a generational thing, right? Like, is that it is time for us to, do better and, give more opportunity, and build better, more inclusive companies. So I think we started with, why are we doing this being bigger than just this is good for business?
Yeah.
I think it's that there's a responsibility to it. And I think the only way to do this is to make a public commitment to building a better company, better teams, one that reflects your audience or your customers, one that's, like we were talking about, like safe to be, creative and grow together, one that recognizes that not everyone's starting from the same place, and engage your team on like, what does that mean? Like, what will it mean? How will we know together that it's working and that we're going to take ideas in and we're going to keep track of it and do that. But I think there's another thing that, our head of DE&I at Vox Media, Chris Claremont, always talks about something really cool to me, which is, thinking about that what do we do? Who are we at Vox Media? We're storytellers, or we're journalists, or we're designers, or, video folks. Like, how can we use our skills and capabilities to, infuse that into our work and use our platform, when it's the right time to do that.
Yeah.
And, make it part of what we do. And so, like, I think there's another part, which is like, how do the values show up in our work? Like, it's not just, from an editorial perspective, it's like, we should fund accessibility work and make that part of the process.
Absolutely.
Do research and be real about the people that we're reaching or that we're not reaching. I think hiring and retaining people and those types of metrics are just a baseline. Like, that's a good starting point. Like, great, but like, how do you really, the point here is that, I think we're trying to make, better companies that, have a responsibility in the, the world that we live in.
Yeah. And I think, working in media, as annoying as it might sometimes be as an industry, also means that you got basically handed a big mic.
Totally.
And being handed a big mic comes with a big responsibility.
Well,
so I'm glad you're saying that.
Is, I think,
totally.
is a thing. And you do have a big microphone. And, I think this is a place where, ideally you have a culture where everybody recognizes that it's maybe not exactly where we want it to be. Maybe not everybody agrees exactly where it should be, but that you're talking and communicating together and feel like you're making progress together about, like, yeah, this project that we are, undertaking together is, and I mean project in the broadest sense of the company that we're building, and the products that we make, that they really live up to, our values that we share. And this is why I think some of the sidism stuff is really, detrimental, is because I think we have so much more in common in that way that we can use as a starting point, even though we may, still be getting to the same place together,
Yeah. Last time we hung out in person, we were in a steakhouse in Buenos Aires.
Very good.
And we talked about product thinking and product strategy. How important do you think product and product strategy, which we chatted at that News Product Alliance dinner about, how important do you think that's going to be for future leadership in media, how organizations are led, how they are structured, how products are built, how audiences are reached?
Yeah, I read this thing the other day that, social media managers are sort of the CMOs of the future. They're going to be running marketing, and I was like, yep, that sounds right. Knowing all the like audience editors, shout out to all the audience development folks and social media, folks, like they really have, I think, this new, ability to understand the community, understand the voice, understand they're listening more, than I think has ever been done before in that field. And so I think, it totally makes sense, right? And so I think it's very similar. There's kind of a similar, path for product folks that I think product folks are going to be the future leaders of all media organizations. And that's not because I'm a product person, but I think it's just my experience and what I see happening is that, product is this sort of alignment of, business goals and, technology and, editorial and pulling all these different pieces.
And culture, I'd add, right?
Oh, man.
Culture.
Yeah. And culture. And I think why is culture talked about so much with product folks is because you have to have a really strong culture to get folks to collaborate and to make really great products and have happy people having fun doing this work and really being, aligned around it. And so I think that culture is a big part of that. You can't help but think about it, just organizationally, just, writing good documentation, writing lots of documents. I think, helping to take really kind of messy, projects and bring order out of them. You have a lot of product folks who were also project managers and vice versa. And so you have, a skill set there. But I think it's really, from a leadership perspective, it's about, being good at facilitating that process, but it's also about storytelling. I really think like product folks are really good. The best ones I know are really good about being able to tell the story of their products and taking the ideas from the team and making sure that those ideas are making it into the story and constantly telling the story over and over and over again and using that as a way to learn, like, are we on the right track? And do people get it? Or is this still confusing? And I think that skill is really important for leadership. I think communication, by far, the most important thing in leadership is being able to communicate effectively to your team and to the outside world, if necessary, if you're, outwardly facing in that way. But most leaders are, in some capacity, have to tell that story wherever they show up. And I think that what it makes you do is get, communication is just so important for getting folks rallied around, hard things and celebrating things and, just making sure folks are clear about where we're going. I think that's a really
Couldn't agree more. Couldn't agree more. As we are starting to wrap up here, last question, Trei.
Mm-hmm.
If Trei now could give a word of advice to younger Trei, let's say 20 years ago, about leadership, about personal leadership, about management, anything you'd like to share with him?
Take more breaks. Recharge more often than you did. I think, I think the thing that is really it's starting to be talked about a lot more. And I think it's really great. I think that burnout is a real issue. And I feel like it's more of an issue right now than it's ever been. And I still think we're having kind of weird, disjointed conversations about it. I think the thing that folks don't fully appreciate about burnout is that it takes time. It's a short-term gambit, right? You can put all your energy in, but it takes longer to recharge from burnout than what you gain from it. Yeah. It's a net loss for you and for everybody else. And so I think, I would tell myself, don't get to that point. I would say, and by the way, like I was definitely burned out, at the end of my time at Vox Media. And I know a lot of folks who are, challenged with that. I think taking the time before that happens, and if you're a leader, look out for it in your people and give them some space. It's not, you may think like, I can't afford to lose them. You're right. You can't. Like, you're going to lose them if they burn out, and more so than you will in the short term. Trust me. So I think, that's the number one thing. And I also just think the last, piece is that I think it's really important to be patient and open-minded. I think I rushed into things, and being patient, you hear more, you listen more. And I, was always at my best when I was listening to other folks and, able to grow and get better as a leader that way.
Trei, wise words. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you. It's been great to be here. Thank you for having me on. This first guest. Exciting.
This was today's episode of Better Leaders. If you enjoyed it, please do follow us and subscribe. Thanks for listening.
Missing link.